In the depths of ancient time, when birds had not yet learned how to pierce the sky and mammals had not yet set foot on the earth, there were other masters. Masters who ruled this planet with a grip of iron and wings of thunder. Their rule was not merely symbolic, rather they were the crowned kings of the earth and the sky in every sense of the word. They were insects, but not the ones we know today for their small size and weak nature. No, they were giants, so immense that they make you reconsider everything you thought about the limits of nature and its capabilities. Imagine with me, dragonflies with wingspans as wide as a grown man's arm, scorpions whose length nearly matches that of an 8-year-old child, and centipedes the size of crocodiles crawling across the forest earth. This was not imagination woven from ancient myths, but a lived reality on this earth more than 350 million years ago. Then, without warning, these worlds disappeared. They disappeared with a quietness more unsettling than their very appearance, leaving us with small insects that are sometimes barely visible to the naked eye. The real question is not when these giants disappeared, but why they never returned, even when the conditions suitable for their existence came back. The answer is not as simple as it may seem, and it is not a single explanation that is enough to paint the complete picture. It is the story of the collapse of the age of giant insects, a long story that extends across millions of years and involves radical changes in the chemical composition of the air, in ecosystems, and in the emergence of new predators that giant insects were not prepared to face. Let us begin from the start, from the world that made the existence of these giants possible in the first place. The Earth, 350 million years ago, was an environment completely different from what we live in today. The forests were dense, humid, and towering, filled with massive plants of which nothing remains today except fossils buried beneath the deep layers of the earth. And swamps covered vast areas of land, and humidity was everywhere, reaching a level that made breathing itself a different experience. But what truly distinguishes that era is not the humidity or the dense forests, but the air itself was different. The percentage of oxygen in the atmosphere reached about 35%, compared to 21% that we breathe today. This massive difference was not just a chemical number on a scientific paper, but it was the direct reason that made the growth of insects to enormous sizes biologically possible. To understand the reason, you must know how insects breathe, because their respiratory system is the key to the entire story.
Insects do not possess lungs as humans or animals do. Instead, they have a network of fine internal tubes called the tracheae. These tubes transport oxygen directly to the body tissues without the mediation of blood or a circulatory system, as happens in mammals. This method, despite its apparent simplicity, imposes a strict physiological limit on body size, because the larger the body becomes, the greater the distance that oxygen must travel to reach the distant tissues. In oxygen-poor air, this means that a large body will suffer from a lack of oxygenation in its internal tissues and gradually collapse. But when the concentration of oxygen in the air rises to 35%, as was the case in that historical era, this limit rises, and with it the margin for growth expands. Gases diffuse more efficiently through the tubes and reach deeper and more distant tissues. This means that the insect can grow larger without its body suffering from internal oxygen deficiency. To understand how oxygen reached this unusually high level, we must understand the nature of those massive forests and what was happening within them. Plants of that geological era, which scientists call the Carboniferous period, absorbed carbon dioxide and released oxygen in massive amounts, just like plants do today. But the difference was what happened when those giant trees died and fell to the ground. Today, when a tree dies and falls in the forest, bacteria and fungi multiply on it, slowly consume it, and turn its body into simple substances that return to the soil. In the Carboniferous period, it was not like that, as bacteria were still unable to break down lignin, the hard material that forms the cell walls of wood. So dead trees accumulated layer upon layer at the bottom of swamps, without decomposing or releasing carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Over time, these massive accumulations transformed into what we now call coal, extracted from beneath the earth. The direct result of all this was a historical imbalance in the atmospheric gas cycle. Oxygen accumulated and increased without being balanced by carbon dioxide, which was trapped underground. In this heavy, oxygen-rich air, insects grew and grew, and nothing seemed to stop their expansion. Dragonflies of that era had wings exceeding 70 centimeters in span, equivalent to the wings of a full-grown hawk. Some arthropods reached lengths of 2.5 meters, weighing more than 50 grams of muscle and hard armor. In such a world, insects stood at the top of the food chain, ruling both sky and land together. But something began to change. At first, it was not a sound or a dramatic event, but a slow, silent transformation that arose from within the earth and began to erode the foundations of this massive kingdom in a deceptively quiet way. Around 305 million years ago, the Carboniferous period began to approach its end. With it, the forests started to break apart and fragment. Vast swamps gradually dried up, and the planet's overall climate shifted toward aridity and the disruption of regular rainfall cycles. What triggered this great collapse was not an earthquake or a strike from the sky, but a microscopic organism invisible to the naked eye. A new type of bacteria appeared, one that had never existed before, developing a capability unknown in nature, the ability to break down hard, woody lignin. As this bacteria spread, the accumulated dead trees from millions of years began to decompose and release the carbon dioxide that had been locked inside them. Oxygen began to decline, not in a sudden or violent way, but slowly and steadily in one irreversible direction. What the dense, oxygen-rich air had once provided for these insects in terms of energy for growth and large body size started to gradually disappear. By the middle of the Permian period, which began around 299 million years ago, oxygen had dropped to about 22%, very close to what we breathe today. For organisms whose bodies had evolved under 35% oxygen, this meant severe respiratory stress on every large-bodied creature. Even so, not all of them immediately gave up, as some managed to survive and resist the harsh conditions in a remarkable way. A species called Meganeuropsis munchiodi was among those resilient creatures. Despite the thinner air of the Permian period, its body length reached 44 centimeters, and its wingspan exceeded 60 centimeters. But every resistance has its limits and its end. Oxygen continued to drop, the climate kept fluctuating, and ecosystems continued their silent and merciless collapse. With every million years that passed, new species of giant insects disappeared and never returned again. Perhaps one of the most fascinating extinction cases was that of a group of insects called Paleodictyoptera, among the earliest pioneers of natural aerial movement. Their wings reached about 56 centimeters, and they fed on plant sap and seeds from ancient forests that evolved alongside them over millions of years in a balanced system. But by the end of the Permian period, around 252 million years ago, those same plant ecosystems began to decline and go extinct, replaced by new plants more resistant to drought, but no longer able to provide the food these insects depended on. Thus, Paleodictyoptera did not go extinct directly because of the air, but because of food, specifically because the plant world they depended on disappeared before they did, and they could not adapt quickly enough to the new substitutes. This point reveals something crucial in understanding the mass extinction. Oxygen was not the only factor pushing giant insects toward disappearance, but rather multiple intertwined forces working in the same direction. However, even after oxygen levels later rose again and ecosystems stabilized, giant insects did not return. Here, scientists face a real and puzzling question that cannot be explained simply by rises and falls in oxygen levels. In the mid-Cretaceous period, about 150 million years ago, oxygen levels in the atmosphere rose again, reaching around 20% after having previously dropped significantly in earlier periods. Theoretically, giant insects should have reappeared since the limiting factor that once prevented their growth, low oxygen, was no longer present. But they did not return, and insects remained small even though the air was once again suitable. This striking contradiction led researchers Matthew Clapham and Jay Kirkland from the University of California, Santa Cruz to conduct an extensive and unprecedented study. They analyzed more than 10,500 insect fossils of flying insects, spanning 320 million years of this planet's natural history. They divided this data into equal time periods, each lasting 10 million years. Then they plotted for each period the maximum size reached by flying insects and correlated it with the atmospheric oxygen level of the same period. The results came out confirming what had initially been expected. For the first 170 million years of flying insect evolution, the relationship between their size and oxygen levels was direct and clear. As oxygen increased, insects grew larger. As it decreased, they became smaller. This was the expected outcome and the basis of the long-standing prevailing explanation. However, the results revealed that during the period between 150 and 130 million years ago, this relationship changed dramatically and unexpectedly. Oxygen levels increased, but insects did not grow larger. They remained small, as if the extra oxygen no longer meant anything to them. The cause was neither internal biological nor chemical in the atmosphere, but rather a new living creature that appeared for the first time in the skies of that era. During that exact period, birds appeared on this planet for the first time. The first of these was what is known as the ancient bird, or Archaeopteryx, a crow-sized creature with feathers and wings, yet still carrying some traits of its reptilian ancestors. Its flight was not fully developed and its size was not terrifying, but its impact on the course of insect evolution was enormous and decisive in a way completely disproportionate to its small body. From the perspective of flying insects, a new predator had entered the same domain they had dominated for hundreds of millions of years. And when a new predator enters any ecosystem, it does not only change the numbers, it completely changes the rules of the game. What was useful yesterday is no longer useful today. Large insects were an advantage in a world without aerial predators, as large size meant stronger muscles, better hunting ability, and even greater capacity to prey on others. But when a fast, agile bird appears in the sky searching for prey, the equation flips completely. The large insect becomes easier to spot, slower to escape, and less capable of maneuvering in the air.
The small, previously marginal insects gained the best chances of survival. And thus, birds began reshaping the insect world without intending to do so, not by eliminating them all at once, but through continuous silent pressure on every large individual until it disappeared. Small generations survived and multiplied, while larger generations were hunted before they could reproduce. With each generation, the average body size decreased step by step. This is what biology calls selective pressure, where the environment favors a specific trait and automatically penalizes the opposite trait over long periods of time. To support this idea, the researchers found a highly significant fossil clue. In the late Triassic period, about 230 million years ago, atmospheric oxygen levels were similar to those of today, yet insects resembling modern grasshoppers had wings reaching up to 17 centimeters in width in a striking way. Today, at the exact same oxygen level, the largest existing insects rarely exceed a wingspan of 7 centimeters. The difference between the two cases is not oxygen. The difference is birds. In the late Triassic period, birds had not yet appeared, so insects were safe in a sky free of pursuers and grew with complete freedom. And the predation pressure did not stop with birds alone. About 69 million years ago, another predator entered from a different type. Bats appeared, and they were nocturnal flyers and among the most voracious insect hunters. With birds, the day ruled over large insects. With bats, the night ruled as well. Thus, every hour of day and night became dangerous for them. The result was that any large flying insect taking flight was essentially gambling with its life on every journey it made. Small size became an advantage instead of a flaw. Agility mattered more than bulk, and speed outlasted strength. Here, a crucial point for understanding the full picture becomes clear. Extinction was never a single strike from a single cause at a single moment. What happened was a chain of accumulated pressures over hundreds of millions of years, each pushing giant insects one step closer to extinction or gradual reduction. The first of these was the collapse of swamp forests, which fragmented dense vegetation into isolated patches and made food more scarce and distant. Then came the wood-decomposing bacteria, which released stored carbon dioxide and depleted the atmosphere of the oxygen that had once allowed massive growth. Changes in plant life wiped out entire insect species that were specialized on plants which had already gone extinct. On top of all this, birds and then bats appeared, adding a factor that oxygen decline alone could not fully explain. The study conducted by the two researchers did not only confirm this historical picture, but also opened a major scientific debate about what determines insect size in our modern world. Dr. John Harrison, an evolutionary biologist at Arizona State University, says these results support the hypothesis that the emergence of birds and later bats became the primary factor controlling the size of flying insects. This idea is further supported by another fossil example from nature that cannot be ignored. An insect called Gigantodax vulgaris lived in the late Triassic period in an environment where oxygen levels were roughly the same as today. It resembled a moth or a winged insect, with a wingspan reaching 40 centimeters, far exceeding anything seen among the largest insects today. Oxygen was not exceptionally high, yet it grew and thrived because it lived in a sky that birds had not yet occupied. This evidence makes predation a central factor that no serious explanation can overlook. In the context of understanding insect size today, another striking result emerges from the same study. Over the past 100 million years, oxygen levels have remained relatively stable at around 21%. Yet the largest insects today typically have wingspans not exceeding 7 centimeters. This means that predation pressure has become more influential than oxygen in determining the size limit of flying insects today. Some researchers go even further, suggesting that if birds and flying predatory mammals were to disappear from our world today, and insects were given enough time without predation pressure, they would likely return to gradual size increase, not to the sizes of carboniferous insects that required an exceptional atmospheric composition that no longer exists, but possibly 2 or 3 times larger than they are now. This is not merely a speculative assumption. It is a conclusion based on the analysis of thousands of fossil records spanning millions of years. So what truly caused the extinction of giant insects? The answer is not a single word or a single cause that can be placed in parentheses and considered complete. The Earth, 350 million years ago, provided insects with oxygen-rich air, vast forests, abundant food, and skies free of predators. Then all of this changed gradually under the influence of multiple interconnected factors that must be considered together. Wood-decomposing bacteria disrupted the carbon cycle and triggered the collapse. The collapse of forests cut off food supplies and displaced species. The drop in oxygen narrowed the limits of growth. Changes in plant life wiped out specific insect species that depended on plants which had already gone extinct. Then birds appeared, effectively closing the door on any possible return of gigantic insects. What remains of this entire story is not just information about extinct insects, but a lesson in how ecosystems affect one another, and how nature does not produce extinction from a single isolated factor, but from overlapping accumulated causes, each influencing the other in a continuous, non-repeating cycle. Perhaps we should ask ourselves today, when we see major changes in the components of the atmosphere and ecosystems, did anyone ever imagine that the spread of microscopic bacteria could once mark the end of an entire world?